After years abroad, I came home and found my mom living as a maid in the $1.5 million house I bought, while my brother lived there like an owner. She didn't even know who I was. I called my lawyer that night. It was time for justice. The plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, and I could barely contain my excitement. It had been 5 long years since I'd seen my mom, since I'd left for Japan to work in industrial welding. 5 years of missing the woman who raised me and my brother, who had been the center of my world. I rushed out of the airport, hailed a taxi, and gave the driver the address of the small house I had bought for my mom before I left. The place had always been a dream of mine. A way to give her something better after all the sacrifices she had made for us. I could already picture her smile when she saw me standing at the door, the warmth of her hug, the familiar scent of her cooking filling the air. But as the taxi pulled up to the familiar iron gate, something felt wrong. I didn't know what it was at first. The house looked different. The street was quiet, bathed in the soft late afternoon sun, the kind that made everything look golden and familiar. But the house itself, it was off. The simple latch lock I remembered, the one Mom used because she was always worried about losing her keys, was gone. In its place, there was a sleek electronic lock with a numeric keypad and blinking LED lights. The kind of lock you'd expect in a modern office building, not in the home of an elderly woman who had barely touched a smartphone. I frowned and glanced around. Surveillance cameras dotted the perimeter, each one sweeping back and forth like a watchful eye. At least 4 of them, installed without my knowledge. My mom, Matilda Rowe, was a 58-year-old woman who had always been terrified of technology. I'd bought her a smartphone once, but she refused to use it, always saying, "Son, it's too complicated. I'll just stick with the old one." How could she have decided to install all of this herself? Maybe she'd hired someone for safety reasons. Maybe the neighborhood had changed, and she needed more security. But as I stood there, staring at the strange, unwelcoming changes, an unsettling feeling crept into my chest. Something wasn't right. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just my nerves. I took a deep breath, grabbed my suitcase, and set it aside. I pressed the doorbell. The chime I'd always remembered rang out, its familiar sound filling me with a brief sense of comfort. I smiled, imagining Mom rushing to the door, her eyes glistening with tears, shouting, "Paul, my boy is home." But the door didn't open. I waited. No sound, no movement. I pressed the doorbell again, this time holding it longer, hoping she'd hear me. Still, nothing. My heart began to beat faster. Maybe she was napping, or maybe she was out at the market. I rang the bell again, and then started calling out, "Mom, it's Paul. Your son is back." The house was unnaturally quiet, and a chill started creeping up my spine. I glanced at the neighbor next door. Mrs. Donnelly, the old woman who had lived there for years, was watering her plants, but she didn't look up. The street seemed frozen in time, the kind of peaceful quiet that only made me feel more isolated. I thought about asking her, but something told me I'd have to wait. Everything would make sense once I saw Mom. Finally, after the 5th ring, I heard a faint clicking sound from inside. The door swung open. But it wasn't Mom who greeted me. It was Colin, my younger brother. The one I remembered as a lazy, irresponsible guy, always getting into trouble, always avoiding work. He stood there in a ratty t-shirt, his messy hair and red eyes making him look like he had just woken up. When he saw me, he flinched just for a split second, but I caught it, genuine surprise. Then, his face shifted. He smiled a wide, almost forced smile, teeth showing but not reaching his eyes. "Brother Paul."
"Oh my God, you're back!"
"Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" His voice was higher than usual, nothing like the lazy drawl he used to have. Before I could answer, he rushed forward and threw his arms around me in a tight hug, slapping me on the back like we were long-lost friends. I froze for a second. What was going on? This wasn't the Colin I remembered. The last time we'd seen each other, we'd had a huge argument. He'd borrowed money from me, never paid it back, and we'd left things in a mess. And now he was hugging me like nothing had ever happened. I gently pushed him away. "Yeah, I'm back, but why are you here? Where's Mom?" Colin laughed a little too loudly, his voice rising with nervous energy. Come in, we'll talk inside." He ushered me in, almost shoving me forward. I stepped inside, dragging my suitcase behind me, and immediately noticed how the living room had changed. The old couch where Mom used to sit and knit was gone, replaced by shiny leather ones. A huge flat-screen TV hung on the wall, and the shelves were cluttered with trendy decorations. Little statues, modern vases. The whole place looked like it belonged to a young couple, not an elderly woman like Mom. I frowned. The house has changed a lot, huh? You did all this? Before Colin could answer, Carla, his wife, appeared in the doorway. She wore a short dress, her hair tied up high, and flashed a smile that seemed more like a performance than genuine warmth. Paul, It's been forever. Colin talks about you all the time. Her voice was sweet, but I could sense the strain in it. Carla and Colin had been married 2 years before I left for Japan. I remembered her as the demanding type, always pushing Colin to make more money while she spent her time shopping. Now, standing there holding a glass of water, her eyes darted toward the kitchen. Something about her made me uneasy. I sat down on the sofa, trying to keep calm. Where's Mom? I've been calling, but she never came out. Colin sat next to me, slapping me on the thigh with exaggerated cheer. Oh, she's in the kitchen. She's doing great, don't worry. His voice dropped slightly, and he hesitated for just a moment. She's a bit tired, doing something. I raised an eyebrow. In the kitchen? We've been talking so loudly. How come she didn't hear us? She always used to rush out right away. Cullen forced a laugh. She's just a bit tired, you know. I'll go call her. But before he could move, I stood up, my heart racing. No, I'll go see her myself. I walked toward the kitchen, feeling a growing sense of dread. With each step, the air seemed thicker, heavier, as if something was closing in around me. As I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. What I saw on the other side made my blood run cold. There, standing in front of the kitchen sink, was my mother. But she wasn't the woman I remembered. I stepped into the kitchen, heart pounding. The sight of my mother stopped me cold. She was bent over the sink, scrubbing a dish, but something was terribly off. The woman I had always known, strong, full of life, was gone. My mom Matilda looked fragile, almost like a ghost. Her once strong hands were trembling, the sponge slipping in her grasp as water dripped onto the floor. Her clothes, a faded, crumpled maid's outfit, were a stark contrast to the vibrant, proud woman I remembered. Her hair, once neatly tied back, was now tangled and graying, her face gaunt and pale. She was still the same woman, but so different, so much weaker. My breath caught in my throat. Mom, I whispered, stepping closer. Her head slowly turned toward me, but her eyes seemed unfocused, dull. For a moment, I couldn't even tell if she recognized me. Her lips parted, but no words came out, just a faint tremble as if her very body had forgotten how to respond. I felt a cold rush of panic and anger swirl inside me. This wasn't right. This wasn't the mom I knew. This wasn't what I had been told. Mom, what's happening? Are you okay? I tried to keep my voice steady, but the words came out broken, filled with desperation. She blinked at me slowly, her eyes unfocused, like she was staring at something far away, then finally whispered, Paul, my son, you're back. Her voice was barely a breath, trembling, barely able to hold itself together. She tried to move toward me, but her legs shook and she swayed unsteadily, as if she couldn't even stand on her own. I rushed forward, catching her in my arms, my heart aching. Mom, what's going on? What happened to you? I held her tight, feeling the coldness of her body, the frailty that I'd never felt before. I remembered her warmth, her strength, her love. Now, she felt like a hollow version of herself. The mother who had raised me was slipping away, and I couldn't understand why. Why are you doing housework like this? You can't even stand. You're sick, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help? As she stared at me, her eyes still vacant, as if trying to gather her thoughts. I wanted to stay busy. I wanted to help keep the house clean. She mumbled, her words stumbling out as if they were foreign to her. She looked down at the dish in her hand, the sponge slipping from her grasp again, and I caught it before it fell. Mom, this isn't normal. You're not well. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, my voice growing louder with each word. My eyes darted to the rest of the kitchen, taking in the mess that seemed so unlike her. This was a woman who had cooked beautiful meals, who had kept a spotless home despite working long hours at the factory. And now, this. Before I could ask another question, Colin appeared in the doorway. Hey, what's going on here? His voice was too high, pitched, forced, as if he was trying to sound concerned but wasn't fooling anyone. He hurried over to us, putting his hand on Mom's shoulder. "Mom, you need to rest," he said, his voice suddenly turning soft, almost soothing, as he tried to guide her away from me. "You shouldn't be working so hard." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What's going on, Colin? Why is she doing this?" I looked at him, my anger rising. "You're letting her clean, cook, and work like this when she can barely stand." Colin avoided my gaze, a flicker of something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. "She insists on doing it. She doesn't want to feel useless. She's been like this for a while." His tone was defensive, and I could see the tension in his posture, as if he was preparing for a fight. I looked at him, disbelief flooding my mind. "How long has she been like this? And why didn't you tell me when I called every week?" He shifted uncomfortably, then quickly glanced at Carla, who had just entered the room. She was holding a glass of water in her hands, her expression perfectly neutral, but her eyes darting between Colin and me. "You know how Mom is," Colin said quickly, his voice strained. "She doesn't want to admit she's not feeling well. She's always been stubborn. We've tried to stop her, but she won't listen." My head was spinning. I turned back to my mom, who was still standing there, clinging to Colin for support. "Mom," I whispered, "why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask me for help?" Her eyes flickered with recognition for just a moment, but then they dulled again, her body sinking against Colin's. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, her voice so small it barely reached my ears. I felt a lump form in my throat. I looked at Colin, then Carla, and back at my mother. Something was deeply wrong here. They were all acting like this was normal, like this was just another day. But I could feel the weight of everything, the way they were hiding something, like a thick veil of secrets surrounding the house, surrounding my mother. "She's not well, Colin," I said, my voice steady but filled with conviction. "I'm not leaving until I get the truth." Colin stiffened, and Carla's smile faltered, but neither said a word. I took a step closer to my mom, holding her hand tightly in mine. "I'm here now, Mom. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I won't let you." I could feel my heart pounding, the tight grip of anger and confusion tightening in my chest. What was really going on here? Why hadn't anyone told me what had happened to my mother? Why had they let her suffer alone, in silence? As I helped her sit down on the couch, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going anywhere until I figured out what had been happening in this house, to my mother, and to our family. I sat next to my mom on the couch, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. I could feel her body trembling slightly under my touch, her frailty more apparent than ever. I wanted to ask her more questions, to dig deeper into what had been happening, but I knew I had to be careful. The last thing I wanted was to overwhelm her further. "Mom, you said you've been forgetful lately." I started softly, my voice steady. "When did this all start? Why didn't you tell me when I was calling you? Why didn't you ask for help?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were focused on the floor, her hands folded in her lap. It felt like she was trying to hold herself together, but the weight of whatever was happening was too much for her. Finally, she spoke, her voice faint but clear. "I didn't want you to worry, Paul," she said, her words slow as if each one took great effort. "I thought I could manage. But I started forgetting things, and Colin. He said it was okay. He said I should just rest." She paused, her eyes flickering up to meet mine for a brief moment. "But I don't think I've been resting. I feel tired all the time." And my heart sank. Something was off, more than just the usual aging. I had sent money home every month, thinking she was fine, thinking that by staying away and working, I was doing what was best for her. But now I couldn't help but feel I had been blind. How could I have missed this? How could I have not noticed that something was wrong? "I should have noticed," I whispered, more to myself than to her. I shook my head, trying to push away the guilt creeping in. I'd failed her. I'd been so wrapped up in my own life, my own escape, that I hadn't seen the cracks in her world. I glanced at Colin, who was sitting across from us. He had barely spoken since we entered the kitchen, his eyes avoiding mine. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something else, nervousness, guilt. It was hard to say, but I could tell he was uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Why didn't you tell me, Colin?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "Why didn't you let me know she was struggling? I've been calling every week, and she never said a word about this. Instead, she's been suffering in silence while you've been, what? Taking care of her." Colin flinched at the words but quickly recovered, giving a forced smile. I didn't want to worry you either, Paul, he said, his voice too high-pitched, too rehearsed. I thought it was just a phase. Mom's always been stubborn, you know that. She didn't want to admit she was getting weaker, so we just let her do what she wanted. I stared at him, trying to understand, but something didn't add up. And the house? Why are all these changes happening? The locks, the cameras, this isn't what Mom would have chosen for herself. Why is it so different? Carla stepped forward then, her forced smile never leaving her face. We just wanted to make sure she was safe, Paul, she said, her voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. You know how things can get in neighborhoods like this. It's better to be cautious. I looked from Colin to Carla, my suspicion growing. There was something off about all of this. The changes, the way they were speaking, it was all too perfect. Too rehearsed. They were hiding something and I needed to find out what it was. I turned back to my mother, who was still sitting quietly beside me, her hands wringing together in her lap. Mom, I said softly, my heart aching for her, I'm going to take care of you now. I'm here. You don't have to hide anything anymore. What's really going on? She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes filled with so much sorrow it almost broke me. I didn't want to burden you, she said, her voice so fragile it barely carried. But things haven't been right for a while now. I didn't want to scare you away. I thought it would pass. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my mother, the woman who had raised me, the woman who had always been there for me. And now she was telling me that she had been suffering in silence, too afraid to tell me the truth. I felt a burning anger rise inside me. Anger at myself for not seeing it, anger at Colin and Carla for letting this happen. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. Why didn't you reach out for help when you needed it? She looked away, her eyes welling with tears. I didn't know how, Paul, she whispered. I didn't want to be a burden to you. I thought I could manage on my own, but I couldn't. The tears that had been building up inside me finally spilled over. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight as the weight of everything hit me all at once. You're not a burden, Mom, I whispered into her hair. You never were. I'm here now, and I'll never let you go through this alone again. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been drugged, Paul. They've been giving me something, pills, to make me forget things. I didn't want to take them, but they said I had to. I didn't know what else to do. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. What do you mean, they've been giving you pills? I asked, pulling back slightly to look at her face. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to Colin and Carla before meeting mine. I don't know what they were, but they made me feel foggy. Like I wasn't really there. Sometimes, I could barely remember what happened the day before. She paused, her voice breaking. I think they wanted me to forget. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the full scope of their manipulation became clear. They hadn't just been neglecting her. They had been actively controlling her. They had drugged her, isolated her, and taken advantage of her vulnerability. My mother, my sweet, strong mother, had been reduced to this. A shell of the woman I had known, barely able to recognize the reality around her. I stood up abruptly, my fists clenched. This ends now, I said through gritted teeth. I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done. No one does this to my mother, no one. As I turned to face Colin and Carla, the anger inside me flared. You've been poisoning her, haven't you? Forcing her to take drugs, making her forget everything. And for what? So you could steal from her. Colin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face paling. Carla's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation. Neither of them spoke, but I could see it in their eyes. They knew they were caught. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. This is just the beginning, I muttered, my voice low and steady. I'm going to make sure you both pay for everything. This family isn't your playground anymore. With one last look at them, I turned and walked out of the room, my mind racing with plans to expose their lies and make them face the consequences of their actions. My mother had suffered enough. Now it was time for justice. I left the house, my mind racing, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The house, the one I had worked so hard to buy for Mom, was no longer a home. It was a prison. I couldn't shake the image of her, weak and trembling in that kitchen, drugged and manipulated by the very people she had trusted the most. My stomach churned as I thought about how they had used her, how they had made her feel powerless, invisible. I stepped into the cool evening air, the quiet streets around me providing little comfort. My fists were clenched, my jaw tight with anger. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit around while they continued to destroy her, while they kept controlling her every move. I had to take action, and I had to do it fast. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew could help me. The one person who had always been there when things got tough. "Daniel," I said, my voice low and tight. "I need you to help me. I'm going after them." Daniel West had been a friend of mine since high school. He was a lawyer now, successful, sharp, and unafraid to go after people who needed to be brought down. When I explained what was happening, what Colin and Carla had done to my mother, he didn't hesitate. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "I'll get started right away. I'll need to talk to you more in person, but we'll figure this out. Don't worry. We'll get them." I ended the call, but the unease still gnawed at me. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just let them get away with what they'd done. They had stolen from her. They had betrayed her trust in the worst way possible. And now it was time for them to pay. I drove through the quiet streets, my thoughts a whirlwind. I was going to need evidence. Proof that they had been drugging her. Proof of everything they'd done. I couldn't trust just their words or their excuses. They had to be held accountable. As I pulled into the parking lot of a nearby diner, I glanced at the time. It was late, but I knew I had to see Daniel face to face. I needed to tell him everything, lay out every detail, no matter how painful. It was the only way forward. Inside the diner, the harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. The smell of coffee and grease filled the air. I sat down at a booth, my hands shaking slightly as I waited for Daniel to arrive. I kept thinking about my mother. Her frail body, her weak voice. She had been so strong when I was growing up. How could this happen to her? How had I let it go on for so long without seeing the signs? Daniel walked in a few minutes later, his face set in a serious expression. He slid into the booth across from me and gave me a brief nod. "All right," he said, pulling out his notepad. "Tell me everything. I want the full story, no holds barred." I took a deep breath and began to recount everything that had happened. From the moment I arrived at the house to the shocking truth I'd uncovered about Colin and Carla. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of my anger and helplessness boiling up again. I told Daniel about the cameras, the locks, the way my mom had been isolated and controlled. And then I told him about the drugs. "I can't believe they did this," I finished, my voice thick with emotion. "I've been sending money home for years thinking she was fine. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I feel like I've failed her." Daniel's eyes were steady as he listened. He didn't interrupt, just nodded along as I spoke. When I finished, he paused for a moment, then looked me dead in the eye. "Paul, you didn't fail her," he said quietly. "You were doing what you thought was best. They manipulated that. But now you know, and now we can do something about it. This isn't over." I felt a spark of hope flicker in me for the first time in hours. Maybe there was a way out of this after all. Maybe I could still protect my mom, still make sure she was safe. "We need to gather evidence," Daniel continued, his voice calm and methodical. "I'll get a private investigator on it. We'll need to track down the people who've been giving her the drugs. We'll need to gather bank statements, anything that shows what they've been doing with the money you've been sending." I nodded, my mind already spinning with plans. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. "I'm not going to let them get away with this. They're going to pay for what they've done." Daniel smiled slightly. The first sign of encouragement I'd seen all evening. "I believe you. We'll get them. But we have to be smart about it. Don't go confronting them without everything in place. They'll cover their tracks if they know we're coming." "I won't do anything stupid," I promised, though the anger burning inside me made it hard to keep my cool. "But I'll do whatever I can to bring them down. I'm not letting them hurt her anymore." Daniel leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Good. Let's get started. I'll have my people look into their financials, see if we can trace the money. And I'll have the PI start tracking the drugs they've been giving her. We'll need solid evidence before we can go to the authorities. but once we have it, we'll take them down hard. I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose settle over me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I could finally make things right. For my mother. For everything she had sacrificed for us. As I left the diner, I felt like I had a plan, something solid to hold on to. But the anger still burned inside me. I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what my mom had said about the drugs, about the way they had controlled her. It felt like my whole world had been upended. Like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept replaying the image of her in the kitchen, trembling, trying to hold on to something that wasn't even there. And Colin and Carla, how had they done this? How had they turned my mother into a prisoner in her own home? I tried to stay calm. Daniel had promised me he would help, that we would get everything together before taking action. But each day that passed, my frustration grew. Every moment felt like I was wasting time, letting them get further away with what they had done. My mind was racing with ideas, with plans, but I had to hold back. I had to be patient, just a little longer. I spent my days doing everything I could to prepare. Everything I could to make sure that when the time came, we had the evidence we needed to take them down. I visited Mom every day, helping her with whatever I could, trying to make her feel safe. It was heartbreaking to see how fragile she had become. Her hands still shook when she held a glass. Her eyes were distant, and her mind seemed to wander more than ever. But I couldn't stop, couldn't let up. Every time I looked at her, I saw how much they had taken from her, how much they had stolen, her strength, her independence, her spirit. But as the days wore on, I began to notice small changes. Mom's memory seemed to be clearing, just a little. She was still weak, still frail, but there was something more in her eyes now. A flicker of recognition, a spark of the woman I had once known. She would ask me about my life in Japan, about the work I had been doing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see the real her underneath the fog. It was like the pieces were slowly falling back into place. One afternoon, after I helped her eat lunch, she looked at me with something like clarity in her eyes. "Paul," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I'm so sorry for everything. I shouldn't have let them do this to me. I should have called you sooner." I took her hands in mine, my heart aching. "You didn't have to go through this alone, Mom," I said gently. "I should have come back sooner. I should have been here." But she shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want to bother you. I thought you were doing so well, so I stayed quiet. I thought it would get better on its own." I kissed her forehead, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It wasn't your fault, Mom. We're going to fix this. I promise you, we're going to make it right." The next day, I received a call from Daniel. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name on the screen. I had been anxiously waiting for updates, hoping that we were getting closer to something solid. "Paul." Daniel's voice came through the phone, calm but with an edge of urgency. "I've got news. We've got the drug records. I've tracked down where they've been getting the sedatives. It's an unlicensed clinic, totally off the books. I've got the footage of Carla buying the drugs, and I've got the transaction records. This is everything we need." I could hear the weight in his words. This was it. This was the break we needed. The evidence was finally in our hands. "Good work," I said, a rush of relief flooding through me. "What's next?" "Next, we take it to the authorities," Daniel replied. "But we need to be careful. We don't want to give them a chance to cover their tracks. We'll need to file everything properly, get the statements, and make sure we've got everything lined up before we make any moves." I nodded, my mind already spinning with the next steps. "I'll be ready. Just let me know what I need to do." I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation settle over me. We had the evidence. We had proof of their abuse, their manipulation, their fraud. But now the real work began. Now we had to make sure it all came to light. Now we had to make them pay for what they had done to my mom. As I looked at her sitting there on the couch, her frail hands gripping her mug, I knew that this wasn't just about taking down Colin and Carla. It was about giving my mom back her life. It was about making sure she never had to live in fear again. And I was going to do everything in my power to make that happen. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering everything I could. Daniel had contacted a private investigator to track Colin and Carla's every move, to dig deeper into their finances and make sure we had all the proof we needed. But the closer we got to taking action, the more I realized how much I had underestimated them. Colin had always been the screw up in the family, but now he was a danger. And Carla, she was the mastermind, the one pulling all the strings. Together, they had created a web of lies and manipulation, and it was up to me to tear it all down. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I needed people who could back me up, who could make sure we were taking the right steps at every turn. I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't let them destroy my mother's life, any more than they already had. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew. Every moment felt like it was building to something. Like the storm was about to break. I could feel it in the air, in the way everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. But I wasn't going to wait anymore. The time for action had come. The time for justice was now. The days leading up to the confrontation felt like a blur, each one stretching on forever as I prepared myself for what was to come. I had been pacing back and forth, making calls, gathering evidence, and planning my every move. The weight of everything pressing down on me was almost unbearable, but I couldn't back down now. My mother needed me, and I couldn't fail her again. Daniel had been working with the private investigator, tracking Colin and Carla's every move. He'd uncovered more damning information about their financial transactions. How they'd drained Mom's bank account, how they'd spent her money on gambling, clothes, and vacations while leaving her to suffer. It was clear that they'd been planning this for a long time. Their actions weren't just negligence, they were calculated, deliberate, and cruel. I knew I had to act quickly. The longer I waited, the more time they had to cover their tracks. I couldn't let that happen. I had to expose them before they could do any more damage. The night before I planned to confront Colin and Carla, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one worse than the last. I kept thinking about my mom, how weak she had become, how fragile. The woman who had raised me was slipping away, and I hadn't been there to protect her. I kept replaying her words in my mind. How she had been drugged, how she had been manipulated. I thought I could handle this, that I could get through it without breaking. But now, the weight of it all was almost too much to bear. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full extent of my anger. They had taken everything from her. They had stolen her health, her freedom, her peace of mind. And now, they were going to pay for it. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. I had to keep my emotions in check. But that didn't mean I was going to back down. Not now, not ever. The next morning, Daniel called me. "I've got everything we need," he said, his voice calm but full of purpose. "The PI has the footage of Carla buying the drugs, and we've got the bank statements. We're ready to move forward." I took a deep breath. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's bring them down." We arranged to meet at a local cafe. I was on edge, but the thought of finally taking action gave me a sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to hesitate. When I walked into the cafe, Daniel was already sitting at a corner table, a folder full of documents in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his eyes serious but filled with determination. "Paul," he said, nodding, "we've got everything we need. This is it." I sat down across from him, my hands gripping the table as I tried to calm myself. This was the moment. This was what I had been working toward. Daniel slid the folder toward me. "Here's the evidence. We've got their financial records, the drug purchases, the bank transactions. Everything you need to prove they've been stealing from your mom." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the papers in front of me. The bank statements were the most damning. There were withdrawals, hundreds of them, all made by Colin. There were payments to casinos, luxury stores, and even a diamond ring for Carla. The money I had been sending to my mom for years had been drained away, used to fund their selfish lives while my mother had been left to suffer. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. How could they do this? How could they treat her like that? The betrayal stung deep, cutting through me like a knife. "Everything is in place," Daniel said, breaking my thoughts. "We've got the PI ready to testify, we've got the bank records, and we've got the video of Carla buying the drugs. This is rock solid." I nodded, trying to steady myself. "Let's go." We left the cafe and headed straight to the police station. The air outside was heavy, thick with anticipation. I could feel my heart racing as we walked through the doors, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was it. This was where the truth would come out, where Colin and Carla would finally be held accountable for what they had done to my mom. The officer at the front desk gave us a curt nod as we approached. "What can I do for you?" he asked, his tone neutral. "I have evidence of elder abuse, financial fraud, and illegal drug use," I said, my voice steady but filled with purpose. "I need to file a report and start an investigation." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but he nodded. "Come with me." We followed him through the maze of hallways, my mind buzzing with what was about to happen. The tension in the air was palpable, but I couldn't back down now. Not when I was this close. Not when the truth was right in front of me. We entered a small, sterile room with a long table. The officer gestured for us to sit down, then left to get the necessary paperwork. I sat there for a moment, staring at the folder in front of me. The evidence that would finally expose Colin and Carla for who they really were. The people who had stolen from my mother, who had manipulated her for their own gain. They would no longer be able to hide behind their lies. As the officer returned and began to take the report, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The burden of the past few days, the weight of the secrets they had kept, was finally starting to lift. The first step toward justice had been taken. Daniel looked at me, a faint smile crossing his face. "We've done it," he said quietly. "Now it's time to wait." I nodded, but the waiting was the hardest part. What would happen next? Would they get away with it, just like so many others had? Or would this be the moment that changed everything? As I walked out of the police station with Daniel, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least now I had taken the first step toward making things right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the path to justice. And I wasn't going to stop until my mother was safe. The weeks dragged on, each day heavier than the last. I had done everything I could, everything that was within my power. The evidence was in place, the case had been filed, and now all I could do was wait. It felt like being trapped in a storm, the winds howling and the rain pouring down, but there was no escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see my mother's face, tired, scared, lost, and it pushed me forward, giving me the strength I needed to keep fighting. But the waiting was unbearable. The days bled into one another, a blur of phone calls and legal meetings. Daniel kept me updated on the progress, but the real work was out of my hands now. I was just another witness, just another voice in the crowd, hoping that justice would come. One evening, after another long day of waiting, I found myself standing outside my mother's house again. The house that had once been her sanctuary, the place where she had raised us, the place that had now been stolen from her. I stood there in the dark, my fingers tightening around the railing of the porch, my breath coming in shallow bursts. It was hard to breathe. It was hard to think of anything but the cold emptiness of what had happened. How had it all gone so wrong? How had I missed the signs for so long? I turned away from the house and walked down the street, my steps heavy, my mind spiraling. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. My anger, my guilt, my fear for my mother. I should have been here sooner. I should have noticed the changes. But now, all I had left was this burning desire for revenge. I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let them destroy her life, destroy everything she had worked for. I found myself walking to the local park, a quiet place I used to go to when I was younger to clear my mind. The air was cool, the trees rustling softly in the breeze. I sat down on a bench and closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. I thought about the night I first came home, about the strange feeling I had when I walked into the house. How the locks had changed, how the cameras were watching everything. How my brother had greeted me with a false smile, pretending to be happy to see me, pretending that nothing was wrong. But it was all a lie. I knew that now. Everything had been a lie, and the worst part was that I had trusted them. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling up inside me again. Why had they done this? Why had they betrayed her? I thought of my mother, her gentle smile, her soft laugh, the way she used to care for us so selflessly. How could they treat her like that? I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, and I turned to see Daniel walking up, his face grim. He sat down next to me on the bench, his eyes scanning the empty park. "We've got a problem," he said quietly, his voice low. They're getting nervous. Colin and Carla, they know we're closing in on them. They're starting to panic. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What do you mean? What are they doing? Daniel looked at me, his expression hard. They're trying to cover their tracks. They've started to move money around. Their lawyer is getting involved, and they're trying to discredit the evidence we've gathered. It's not over yet, but we're getting closer. I nodded, my mind already whirling with possibilities. This wasn't going to be easy, but I had come too far to back down now. What's the next step? We'll push harder, Daniel said, his voice steady. We keep the pressure on. We gather more evidence, more witnesses, and we make sure the authorities know everything. We'll hit them where it hurts, financially, legally. And we won't stop until they pay. I took a deep breath, letting his words settle into me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I couldn't let Colin and Carla get away with what they had done. Not to my mother, not to our family. As Daniel stood up to leave, he gave me one last look. You're not alone in this, Paul. We'll get through this together. Just hang in there a little longer. I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkening night. The park was empty now, the wind rustling through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. We were going to win this, we had to. For my mom. For everything she had sacrificed. I stood up, my body heavy with determination, and turned back toward the house. The journey was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The final day arrived. It wasn't just another day. It was the day everything would come to a head. The police had gathered the evidence. The legal teams were ready. Colin and Carla were going to be confronted with the full weight of what they'd done. The betrayal, the abuse, the manipulation. They could no longer hide behind their lies. I could feel the tension in the air as I prepared to face them. But there was something else too, the heavy weight of the last 5 years. The years I had spent working abroad, sending money home, thinking I was doing what was best. But it was all built on a lie I couldn't undo, no matter how hard I tried. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The seats were filled, reporters, spectators, all gathered to watch the culmination of a family's destruction. My mom sat next to me, her fragile hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty of what was to come. But she was stronger now. She had started to reclaim herself, little by little. I had seen it in the days leading up to this moment, her spark returning, her will to fight reigniting. But today, we would face the consequences of everything that had happened. There was no turning back. The doors to the courtroom opened, and Colin and Carla were let in. The sight of them, shackled and in prison uniforms, hit me harder than I expected. My brother, the one I had once protected, now a prisoner. His face was gaunt, hollow, his once confident demeanor replaced with an air of defeat. Carla, standing beside him, looked no different. Her sharp features twisted in a way I had never seen before, full of regret, fear, and something darker. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about them. This wasn't about their tears or their remorse. This was about my mother, about everything they had stolen from her. I turned to look at her, her eyes locked on Colin and Carla, a mixture of sorrow and betrayal reflected in her gaze. I knew what she was thinking. She was still his mother. No matter what he had done, he was still her child. But I also knew that she would never let them get away with it again. She had fought so hard to raise us, to protect us, and now it was my turn to protect her. The trial began, and the prosecutor read the charges aloud. Fraud, elder abuse, theft, and the illegal administration of sedatives. The room was quiet except for the sound of the prosecutor's voice, each word hitting like a hammer. My heart was heavy, but I didn't look away. I had to see this through. For Mom, for everything she had endured. As the evidence was presented, I felt the weight of it all settle in. The bank statements, the video footage of Carla buying the drugs, the neighbors who had witnessed the abuse. It was undeniable. They couldn't hide anymore. Colin's defense was weak, a series of excuses and half-truths. Carla's attempt to shift the blame onto Colin felt hollow. The evidence had already spoken. The moment came when my mother was called to the stand. She was shaky as she stood, her frailty evident, but there was something else there. A quiet strength. She had lived through the worst of it, and now she was ready to speak her truth. Her voice wavered at first, but then it grew steadier as she recounted the events, each word breaking through the years of silence and fear. She spoke of the pills they had forced her to take, the isolation, the control. She spoke of her love for them, despite everything they had done. And with every word, I could feel her healing. I could feel her reclaiming the pieces of herself that they had tried to steal. As her testimony came to an end, the room was silent. The weight of her words hung in the air, the truth now laid bare for everyone to see. Colin and Carla sat there, unable to deny it any longer. It was over. The verdict was read aloud. Colin was sentenced to 18 years for his part in the fraud and abuse. Carla, the mastermind, received 22 years for her role in manipulating and controlling my mother. It was justice, but it didn't feel like victory. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. What I felt was a quiet sadness, a finality that I wasn't sure how to handle. I turned to my mother, and for the first time, I saw the weight lift from her shoulders. She had been through so much, but she was still here, still with me, and that was all that mattered. We walked out of the courtroom together, hand in hand. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the streets as we made our way to the car. For the first time in a long time, I could feel a sense of peace settling over us. The storm had passed, but it wasn't over. The healing, the rebuilding, that was just beginning. There was still so much to do, and I knew that I would be there every step of the way. For my mom. For us. The world outside seemed brighter now, lighter. It felt like the first breath after a long dive into darkness. We had made it through, and I would do whatever it took to make sure that nothing, no one, could ever hurt her again. We drove home that evening, the sound of the tires on the pavement a steady rhythm in the background. My mom sat beside me, her head resting against the window, her eyes closed. I glanced at her, a soft smile tugging at my lips. We had a long road ahead of us, but we would walk it together. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what came next, we would be all right. I drove in silence, the world passing by, but it was no longer filled with fear or uncertainty. It was filled with possibility, with the promise of a future where we could finally heal. The journey was far from over, but we had taken the first step, and that was enough. For now, it was enough.